It's now my great pleasure to move on to our next and final plenum this morning. And we have heard a voice from the Philippines, and now we'll hear another. I want to welcome, and it's my pleasure to do so, Leila de Lima, who is a distinguished lawyer and a former senator of the Republic of the Philippines. She has served as the Secretary of Justice and as the chairperson of the Philippine Commission of Human Rights. She's a prominent and vocal critic of former President Rodrigo Duterte's controversial war on drugs, and she was unjustly detained for nearly 7 years in prison. Throughout her career, she has been a staunch advocate for human rights, for justice and the rule of law. Despite the challenges that she has faced, she remains a resilient and influential figure in Philippine politics and advocacy, and where she will speak to us on Sanctuary and Saviour, the Church in the Philippines during the drug war. We are honoured to have you, Leila. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, Reverend Fathers, priests, sisters, missionaries, religious, and lay partners, a pleasant day to everyone. And to the Society of Divine Word, happy 150th anniversary. In all honesty, I feel like an outlier in this assembly. I'm obviously not a clergy person, and I won't be able to quote from scriptures or articulate on dogmatic teachings, but I'm here to tell you about the phenomenon, the abomination that happened in my country's, the Philippines, very recent political history. I'm quite relieved that I see quite a number of Filipinos and Filipinas in the audience. I know they know this story, and I would like to share this with you. I was wounded, and I'm now currently healing. I was charged with fabricated trumped-up cases, but I was freed last November 2023, and I'm now telling my story not only to my country, but also to the whole world, and about that crisis that happened, a humanitarian crisis that happened in our country. From June 30, 2016 to June 30, 2022, the Philippine government, under the leadership of President Rodrigo Duterte, carried out a drug war that resulted in the extrajudicial killing of an estimated 30,000 Filipinos. This abomination became possible due to the acquiescence of our political and legal institutions. But it was also mostly due to popular support from a population, 80% of whom are Roman Catholics. These facts alone should shock anyone of average moral convictions in these modern times. But in the Philippines, for 6 long years, we forgot God and turned to the devil for salvation, not the biblical devil, but its metaphorical approximation in the person of Mr. Duterte. The National Drug War Campaign was copied from Duterte's model project during his 24-year reign as mayor of the southern city of Davao in Mindanao. As mayor, Duterte organized the so-called Davao Death Squad, or the DDS, which consisted of active duty policemen and civilian recruits. Under direct orders from Duterte, the DDS, Davao Death Squad, went after drug suspects, neighborhood gang members, petty criminals, and the occasional political or business opponent. They abducted or shot them outright in the streets and slum communities of Davao City. Those abducted were killed and buried in dumping grounds. Many were also thrown into coastal waters, tied to hydraulic jacks and with stomachs slashed so the body would not float. By the time I investigated the killings in 2009 as chairperson of the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, the victims of the DDS in Davao City and its environs numbered around 2,000. Not content with that, and fast forward to 7 years later, Duterte promised in his campaign speeches in 2016 that he would kill 100,000 more if he is elected president of the Philippines. Either despite or because of this promise, Duterte won the 2016 presidential elections. Not one to waste time, he made good on that promise from the very first day of his 6-year term up to the end. Duterte's 6-year drug war was extensively covered by international media. Undoubtedly, it generated a global sensation. A third world strongman promising to be the Hitler of the Philippines by exterminating 3 million Filipino drug addicts. BBC said in a news report in September 2016, quote, "Praising Adolf Hitler is inconceivable, but Mr. Duterte has compared himself to Hitler, saying he will kill as many addicts as Hitler did Jews," end of quote. In December 2016, Daniel Berehulak of the New York Times, despite years of experience covering war zones, reported that, quote, "The Philippine drug war is a new level of ruthlessness," end of quote. Bodies can be found on the sidewalk, on train tracks, in front of schools, and outside stores and restaurants. In August 2017, CNN reported that 32 people were killed in one day, and Duterte wanted this repeated daily. The international reports on Duterte's drug war are endless, but the message is the same. For 6 years, from 2016 to 2022, the oldest and largest Catholic nation in Asia cheered the slaughter of drug suspects. This happened in a country that has already abolished the death penalty. Duterte's drug war did not only practically reinstall the death penalty, he also appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner. This was his own perverted version of street justice that altogether supplanted the rule of law and the Philippine justice system. Virtually no one was prosecuted and convicted for the thousands of killings, except for a handful that cannot be more than 10 policemen. This was a token gesture by Duterte's Department of Justice. On the other hand, government prosecutors who dismissed drug cases were themselves gunned down in broad daylight while on their way to work. It was a clear message to the handful of prosecutors who refused to cooperate. Internal investigators and government lawyers were under instructions not to obstruct the killings. The body count was happily recorded in the President's 2017 official year-end accomplishment report as more than 20,000 killed in police and vigilante operations. This was just the first year and a half of Duterte's 6-year term. It is not far-fetched that this figure at least doubled by the end of this 6 years. Support for Rodrigo Duterte's drug war in this Roman Catholic country remained high throughout his presidency. According to surveys, public approval of the campaign was consistently around 70% to 85% at its peak. This means that 8 out of every 10 Filipinos were not bothered by the killings, so long as Duterte made good on his promise to eradicate the Philippine drug problem. To human rights defenders like myself, this was incomprehensible. It was like we were inside a living nightmare. For the first 6 months of Duterte's term, I led the opposition to the mass slaughter being conducted by his administration. Back then, it was suicide to fight Duterte, as it eventually proved to be true in my case. With the support of leaders of the Catholic Church and human rights activists, I found strength and courage to tell Filipinos that the drug war is wrong, that killing is unacceptable, and that the victims are human beings who did not deserve to die. It was only a matter of time before my voice was silenced to serve as a lesson to all politicians who still dared to fight Duterte and his drug war. I was eventually arrested 8 months into the drug war. I was kept inside a small room with its own small toilet, but with a large courtyard that allowed me to grow plants and exercise. I was segregated, but not isolated. My constant companions were the police camp's stray cats. For some reason, the cats were the only creatures aside from the rats that were able to freely navigate the dystopian structure of barbed wires, nylon net covers, concrete walls, iron bars, and steel gates, while I rotted relatively safe inside his prison, except for one instance when I was taken hostage and almost killed by an Islamic extremist detainee. In the outside world, the people of the church risk their own lives to save as many as they can. All through the years I spent in prison, thousands died. Sometimes as much as 30 human beings a day were killed in police and vigilante operations. I myself did not stop trying to make a difference from inside prison, but a prisoner can only do so much. I only regained my freedom in November 2023, after almost 7 years in prison. 6 years, 8 months, and 21 days, or a total of 2,454 days. When I was arrested, nobody was left to fight the drug war other than the Catholic Church. For a while, we were afraid that regardless of being members of the clergy, our priests and bishops can also be arrested. Worse, they could be killed if they became more vocal in their opposition to the killings. Duterte has no love lost for the Catholic Church and its clergy. When he was just a candidate for president, he became an international sensation as the vulgar Filipino mayor who cussed at the Pope for causing traffic during his papal visit to Manila. The start of the drug war also ushered in Duterte's tirades on the Catholic Church and the clergy. He did not lack vulgar speech for Catholic priests and their character. He called them womanizers and sexual offenders, among other things. He also called the Catholic Church the most hypocritical institution since the time of St. Peter. He said the 2,000-year-old institution has only 25 years left before it completely disappears. Duterte spewed a lot of hate speech against the church. He appeared to be the devil's spokesperson on earth. With his campaign to kill 100,000 Filipinos before his term ended, his wish to be the Filipino Hitler, and his incessant personal attacks on the church, in many ways he is. For all the religiosity of Christian Filipinos, they could not even recognize the closest manifestation of the biblical Antichrist when it appeared before them, despite the giveaway malevolent words and deeds. Quite the contrary, they even applauded him when he said he was willing to go to hell if that was the price he had to pay for all the people he killed for the sake of the safety of law-abiding Filipinos. He made it appear to be a most noble sacrifice he was willing to take, and Filipino Christians, or many of them, believed him. In one of his speeches, he framed his election victory as the Filipinos' mandate, choosing him over the church that he wanted humiliated and destroyed. He saw his election to the presidency as his triumph over the Catholic Church. In October 2017, Duterte called God himself a son of a whore and asked, "Who is this stupid God?" What scares me more than this image of the biblical Antichrist come into flesh is that many Filipinos still want Duterte to return to power. He has already desensitized many from any sins of morality and empathy. Very few within the Catholic hierarchy believed that Duterte's attack on the Catholic Church would be limited to hate speech. It was only a matter of time before they found themselves in the crosshairs of Duterte's drug war. When Caloocan Bishop, now Pablo Virgilio Cardinal David, gave sanctuary to children who were witnesses to the murder of another teenager, the government threatened him with obstruction of justice charges, even kidnapping. Cardinal Ambo, as is more familiarly known, had all the reason to protect the children witnesses. For more than a year, he has sorrowfully followed the killings in his community. He kept records of their names on his cellular phone. There were so many that his list could not keep up with the killings. He had to update the list regularly, lest he missed a name whose soul he had to pray for, on top of the tens or even hundreds of others whose burials he already attended. For calling out the government of the drug war killings, Cardinal Ambo earned Duterte's ire. He accused him of being a drug pusher and user and said that he would personally cut off his head. This was Duterte's signal that the cardinal was fair game for slander and abuse by his officials and supporters. Soon enough, the good cardinal was receiving death threats that also screamed from his cellular phone, as if the names of the dead sons, daughters, fathers, and mothers on the same phone did not already torment him enough. The threats said that he was next in the list for summary execution. He was also warned not to go home to Caloocan while the threats were still fresh. For the first time in his life, the man who offered his church as sanctuary to others was himself in need of one. Luis Antonio Cardinal Tagle was another leader of the Roman Catholic Church in the Philippines who expressed concern over the drug war fever that has swept over the majority of the country's Catholic population. In August 2017, Cardinal Tagle, then Archbishop of Manila, condemned the drug war killings. He called on the killers, especially those who cover their faces, to stop wasting human lives. He said that, quote, the illegal drug problem should not be reduced to a political or criminal issue, end of quote, and instead should be treated as, quote, a humanitarian concern that affects all of us, end of quote. Following this, Cardinal Tagle met with families of the victims that recently killed in the drug war. In an act of hope, he also attended a spiritual retreat of fresh graduates of the Philippine National Police Academy to facilitate their recollection. He called on pastors and lay leaders to condole with drug war victims in their communities by going to their wakes in order to bless and console the grieving families. To emphasize the gravity of the crisis, he ordered the revival of the church practice of tolling the bells every 8 o'clock in the evening for everyone to remember and pray for those killed. After Cardinal Tagle was appointed by the Pope as the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, Duterte announced to the League of Municipalities of the Philippines that the Pope removed him as Manila Archbishop for his meddling in politics. A blatant lie. Another of his blatant lies. Lingayen Pangasinan Archbishop Socrates Villegas was one of the earliest to risk being targeted by Duterte and his men by deciding to be vocal against the drug war. In August 2016, barely a month after the start of the killings, Archbishop Villegas issued the strongest statement yet by a church leader against the killings. In the message read to his archdiocese, Archbishop Villegas asked for the killings to stop and for Catholics to rise up and defend those afraid of being the next target of the killers. He also said he was ready for the social media abuse expected against those who criticized Duterte and his policies. He said he was ready to die if that is the consequence of his condemnation of Duterte's kill, kill, kill policy. Already in Duterte's crosshairs, Archbishop Villegas was one of the Catholic bishops charged with sedition by the Duterte government 4 years later. And together with the Cardinal, Fathers Flavi Villanueva, SVD, Father Albert Alejo, SJ, and Robert Reyes, Archbishop Soc also received death threats. He received a text message telling him to prepare his grave. Notified by Cardinal Tagle of the death threats on the bishops, Duterte ordered his followers, in his usual flippant style of speaking, not to kill the bishops because he will not gain anything from their death. It was his way of trivializing death threats that he himself encouraged to further terrorize church leaders. Eventually, Archbishop Soc Villegas came out publicly offering sanctuary to policemen involved in the summary executions, but who decided to reveal what they know and possibly testify in court. On the ground, priests like Fathers Flavi, Albert, and Robert were already taking the first steps in protecting the families of the victims of the extrajudicial killings also as possible witnesses. But this time, an investigation on the Philippine human rights crisis was already being conducted by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Father Flavi has a program called Paghilom. He lectured earlier about this project. Paghilom means healing in the Filipino language. Father Flavi was also one of the priests charged with sedition by the government. Upon being charged, he said that, quote, "If being seditious means providing care and sanctuary for those who have been left behind and victimized by the fake drug war, then I accept and I am guilty of sedition," end of quote. Father Flavi has since been acquitted of the charges. Father Albert Alejo was another priest charged with sedition for his anti-drug war efforts. Neither Duterte nor his Davao Death Squad was new to Father Albert. He lived in Davao City during his formation years into priesthood in the 1980s and again from 2000 to 2010. When I conducted the investigation of the Commission on Human Rights on the Davao Death Squad in 2009, Father Albert was among the first to offer his help and support. At the time, it was farthest from our minds that the killing spree would be magnified tenfold 7 years later. We never expected Duterte to be president and replicate the DDS killings nationwide, this time as a national government policy instead of just one rogue mayor's criminal enterprise. After receiving death threats for his anti-drug war efforts, Father Albert had to restrict his movements. He also had to vary his routine so as not to be predictable in his travels. He declined offers of protection from the police, knowing the same to be duplicitous, since it was precisely the Philippine National Police that was primarily responsible for carrying out the extrajudicial killings. Instead of mainly looking out for his own safety, Father Albert made it his mission to give succor and sanctuary to drug war whistleblowers like Arturo Las Cañas. I don't know if you know Arturo Las Cañas. Las Cañas was a Davao policeman and the operations leader of the Davao Death Squad, who was personally recruited by Duterte in 1988. He was privy to most DDS operations until he came out publicly in 2017 to testify against Duterte in the Philippine Senate. If there is anyone more knowledgeable about DDS operations and their victims from 1988 to 2016, other than Duterte himself, that person is Las Cañas. He's now under the protective custody of the International Criminal Court. Las Cañas eventually found safe haven in another country. He made himself available to the investigators of the ICC. He is probably the most important witness against Duterte insofar as a future ICC trial is concerned. Father Albert made all of this ICC pre-trial evidence gathering possible, along with Father Flavi. The only thing we are all now waiting for is for the ICC to announce its decision to hold Duterte on trial for crimes against humanity. Together with Father Flavi and Father Albert, Father Robert Reyes also received death threats, as well as charged with sedition for persisting in his anti-drug war mission. Father Robert described Duterte as the dark prophet who came to rouse the Philippine Catholic leadership from a deep sleep. For his anti-drug war efforts of giving comfort to the victims' families, as well as being vocal publicly against the drug war killings, Father Robert was continuously harassed by Duterte's police. He was conspicuously monitored by the government as if to send the message that he was always being watched. During the pandemic, the police came out with guidelines threatening to arrest even priests if those who attended their mass did not observe social distancing. This was just another veiled threat to Father Robert and the others that it is not beyond Duterte's police to start arresting priests. It was only a matter of time before some members of the clergy were killed. During Duterte's incumbency, 3 priests were killed under mysterious circumstances. One was ambushed in his car after negotiating the release of a political prisoner. Another, while saying blessings on a group of children, was shot dead by a motorcyclist. A third was murdered at the altar in front of parishioners just before Mass. Not only the Catholic clergy was active in saving and giving sanctuary to the victims and their families, the mission was also carried out by the Catholic laity in the Philippines. I just don't have the time to go through all those efforts and initiatives of the Catholic laity as their contribution to giving refuge to drug war victims. Now, the church has been criticized that it did not do more than it should have, like what it did in the 1986 EDSA revolution. You must have heard about that, when Cardinal Sin called the faithful to go out into the streets in a demonstration of people power. This action of the church in 1986 directly resulted in the ouster of the dictator Marcos and the installation of President Cory Aquino. I actually responded to such an accusation by saying that with a civil society like this, meaning they're all scared in going against Duterte for fear of their own past actions, and you think anyone has any business complaining that the church is not doing more? It's just a matter of having courage. Many among the clergy, and even the church itself as a whole, have courage. I cannot say as much for my own fellow elected leaders and public officials in the country. During Marcos Sr.'s time, Jaime Cardinal Sin, then the leader of the Catholic Church in the Philippines, was very calculating and careful. He did not want to appear political, especially when the Marcos regime did not avowedly proclaim a policy of killing activists and political adversaries. In Duterte's case, the church was more vocal because Duterte had no qualms proclaiming that it is his official policy to kill as many drug users and pushers as the police and vigilantes can. Given that impunity, the church had to confront Duterte head on. Of course, it did not call for the overthrow of Duterte, but this restraint on the part of the church still did not stop the government from filing sedition charges against the targeted church leaders, which I mentioned earlier. It was enough that the church did its part by being vocal against the killings and protecting those who needed protection from the killers. In my own opinion, the comparison should not be with Cardinal Sin's call for people power in EDSA. The similarity is with the resistance to the Marcos dictatorship of ordinary priests and lay people who worked in the basic Christian communities. Their grassroots work brought clergy and lay leaders in conflict with the martial law government of the dictator Marcos Sr. In the same manner, the anti-drug war mission of the bishops and clergy caused them to be threatened, harassed, and attacked by the Duterte regime. The church in the Philippines is a half-millennium institution, 500 years. 80% of Filipinos remain to be Catholics. The Catholic Church survived throughout the centuries because it has kept a hold on the Filipino masses' religious and spiritual consciousness. They would have criticisms of the church every now and then, but they would not break away from it. In the end, only the Catholic Church was able to sustain the anti-EJK and anti-drug war message effectively and widely, while our political and social institutions fell silent. Because of its capability to sustain the anti-drug war campaign, the church was the most valuable actor in the cause for human rights, more so on the right to life that was no longer recognized by the established government. The church was the anchor of the national resistance to the drug war and its modality of extrajudicial killings. It became the sanctuary of the victims, their families, the witnesses, and the whistleblowers. The church was the institution to run to when everything was already hopeless because all government institutions were hostile to the victims. This is why Duterte was determined to wage war on the church and its leaders. During this time, I was mostly in prison. Fathers Flavi, Albert, and Robert visited me regularly, especially on Sundays when they held Holy Mass for my family and friends. Even if I was the face of the political opposition against Duterte, it was the church who did most of the work. I did not stop opposing and speaking against the drug war and the EJKs, but I could only do so much inside prison. That was my only regret. At the height of the drug war, I was not able to join the church in taking care of the victims of the drug war. Close to 3 years after Duterte and the murderous drug war, the mission of the Catholic Church in the Philippines as sanctuary and savior has reached another challenging level. This is the conclusion part of my talk. This level is twofold. The first is getting justice for the victims of the drug war. The second is calling on the faithful to return to Christ and renounce the evil that was the drug war. It is only by fulfilling the first can we achieve the second. Catholics and Christians must first recognize the importance of getting justice for all those who died before they can ask forgiveness for applauding the drug war. Until then, they will not realize that they have sinned and spurned Christ by supporting the killing of innocents. Father Albert put the challenge succinctly in the following words, quote, "How come many Christians, including priests and nuns, would lend support to extrajudicial killings? We really need to have a collective soul searching. This is not just a political and economic struggle. It is a moral and spiritual one. We, including the Catholic Church, need to double check. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? What else do we need to do?" End of quote. Only by finally being able to answer these questions can healing in Asia's largest Catholic nation become possible after 6 years of Christians turning against themselves because of Duterte's sweet but false promises. We are no Jesus Christ, but somehow it should not be too difficult for us, Filipino Catholics and Christians, to follow his example of fighting the devil's mocking and resisting his temptations. Maybe next time we can do better and not applaud the murder of others for the sake of a sham peace birthed by evil and injustice. With the arrest and imprisonment of Duterte at the ICC detention center in The Hague for trial, perhaps the quest for justice has been partly fulfilled. Much still has to be done, including restitution and compensation for the victims and their families. But at least the march towards justice is moving, thanks mostly to the efforts of church people, human rights activists, and allies in the media. But the recovery for the soul of a Christian nation that tolerated and abetted the killings must immediately follow. For us to be able to celebrate the justice won, we must first reclaim the lost sheep in our small country and bring them back into the fold of our faith. Only then can the healing start. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Leila, for your witness, your courage, your faith, your honesty, your challenge to us. You know, that last sentence, to recover the soul of a nation. In how many different ways the soul of a nation can be destroyed. So perhaps just we take a moment and we remember all those who have died, thinking of the 40,000 who were killed during this drug war. I'm thinking of the the witnesses and their courage. Thinking of those who still mourn, those they have lost. Gratitude for the role of the bishops and clergy and laity. But also saying to myself and to all of us here, what is it calling us to be? Who is it calling us to be as church? And so I invite comment, reflection, question, what you would like to say in response.
I am Father Cesar. I am a Saveria missionary. I was in the Philippines in these years, the 2013, not 20, last year. All these struggles, I lived in my parish. We lost the number of people that we had to bless. I was only once, thanks God, I was not able to bless someone who was killed because of all this confusion around for security reasons. Now the ladies of the community said, "No, Father, don't go there." And my question, it's not a question, but I asked even before. Now, after all this process, we know Duterte is here now, near to us. What is the feeling, knowing what feelings means for the Filipino? No? What is the feeling now after all these struggles? Thank you.
Shall I answer that already? Okay, thank you for that question. I like to believe, because in fact this is backed by a recent survey, that actually most Filipinos, can you hear me? Okay. Most Filipinos actually is in favor of holding Mr. Duterte accountable for his crimes. If I'm not mistaken, it's 51% in favor and just 20+% not in favor. But you see, I cannot be too sure, really. Especially now, we can see that even if he's already there at the detention facility at The Hague, now his followers, his fanatic followers, you know, those blindly following him, have been doing a lot of things like, you know, the disinformation, the fake news. It's actually on hyper mode since he was arrested in March 11. All sorts of lies, all sorts of distortions of facts we could see in the social media. So it's no surprise anymore that even as we speak, there are really some movements, some mass actions by the group of Duterte followers. And in fact, this coming Friday, he is supposed to celebrate his 80th birthday, and there is a big rally or whatever that is called by Filipinos there, by the OFWs at The Hague. So that is something that we find deeply perplexing. The same feeling that I had when many people were applauding the killings when it started in 2016 and it went on for a few more years is again what I feel now. What is this? No, justice is now being served, at least it's the start of the process of delivering justice to his victims, thousands of them. But how come how come they seem still to favor his style, his, I cannot understand that. And my fellow Filipinos here and Filipinas, I think you will agree with me that there is such a crisis in our country as to how is it, everything that he did, everything that he was talking about, all his rhetoric, all his lies, but many people still appear to revere him. So that's what I was talking about in the end part of my talk, that we have been lost as a nation. Our soul has been damaged as a nation, and it cries out for healing. But healing starts with the recognition that something very wrong and evil happened during the reign of the former president. So I don't have really a clear answer to that. Thank you.
Okay, at the back first.
Hello. Maria Ressa, who was just speaking at the Vatican recently at the Jubilee for Communications, has drawn a lot of parallels between what has happened in the Philippines and what has been happening in the United States. And we've noticed that a lot of the policies that are contrary to Catholic social teachings and so on are also widely supported by Catholics in the United States. So I wondered to what extent is the situation in the Philippines is beyond this confine of the Filipino context, but is something that we witness in many contexts around the world, where Catholics at the level of the laity as well as the clergy are supporting policies that are quite contrary to Catholic teachings. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts and reflections on this from a more global perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot of soul searching, I think, is needed. Now, in the Philippines, it looks like, again, on the part of his followers, his fanatic followers, it looks like that he still want the return of the Dutertes in power. Well, in fact, Dutertes are still in power because the vice president is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte. But he is also being subjected now to an impeachment proceeding. She has actually been impeached already, and she will be standing trial before the Senate as an impeachment court because of betrayal of trust, and also corruption issues. Now, but they still would want, they're supporting the Dutertes to be again in power in the coming 2018 elections. Now that we're also in a quandary, because as you know, our current president now is the son of the former dictator, Marcos Sr. And then they used to be allies at the start of the term of President Marcos Jr. The Marcoses and the Dutertes are allies, the so-called uni team. But after only about 2 years, that unity has disintegrated. They're now out to go against each other. Now, the Marcos administration also has issues. And then the Duterte, of course, mainly because of this, his accountability for the thousands of killings in the name of his sham war on drugs. But Marcos Jr. himself, you know, I would say that he probably lacks the moral ascendancy to really be strong about also helping out in the search for justice for the victims of Duterte's war on drugs. So I don't know. So it's the situation in the Philippines remains volatile. It remains fluid because we would not know what is the next political happening would be witnessed by us, especially that in May of this year is our midterm elections. And that's why I always emphasize whenever I go around the country, because I'm actually now a candidate for a party list, I always emphasize how crucial and critical this coming elections would be because of so many issues besetting our country, because of the Duterte and the Marcos issues. And the opposition well, this is an opportunity for the Philippine opposition to rise, to step up. But there are constraints also insofar as that is concerned. So the trend towards authoritarianism, populism is still quite there with the re-election of Mr. Trump in the US and the remaining, of Duterte remaining powerful and has wielded influence significantly in the military and the police sectors. If he stayed one day more, because I don't know if you were able to monitor the news, that the warrant of arrest came out in March 11. He was arrested in March 11, and after a few hours, he was transported to The Hague. Many are questioning that as a violative of his rights. But of course, we say that how can it be a violation, and how can it be a violation of his right to due process when the warrant of arrest was issued by an international tribunal with competent jurisdiction over those alleged crimes against humanity. But I could understand the way that the administration, the Marcos Jr. administration, handled the whole thing by immediately turning him over to The Hague. Because if he stayed one more day or 2 more days, anything could have happened. It could have, triggered some destabilization because there would be now consolidation of his forces. Thank you.
Just one last question so that we end in time. Yeah.
Matthew, clinician. I have deep a personal affection for Philippines and also admiration for the Catholic community, the biggest Catholic community in Asia. The question I ask is perhaps to us, not just to you. When we think of the dance of God and the mission as the journey to that fullness, thinking of these countries like Philippines, now Nicaragua, or even United States, where elections happen and people are elected, and the elected people's action, they promised certain things. And what happens to the Christian consciousness of the majority, which makes that possible? Because the very promise of Duterte was that he will do this. And the people wanted that it happens. I have deep appreciation for you to be the voice of conscience, Christian conscience, to Flavi and Robert and Albert. But this is a question, when we think of mission, how do we take care of our Christian consciousness? This just, I work from within me.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the place we should stop. It's a question to us, right? For everyone, for every single one of us. How do we take care of and nourish our Christian consciousness in all those different contexts that we have spoken about today? And I'm going to give the last word to the biblical scholar. If you have any response yourself, Nicoletta. Just any comment you want to make.
But it's very interesting because the last question was my questions. Because I wrote here for my sister, I was waiting in private to ask her. Because this is one situation. For example, we know very well in Africa that the second Synod for Africa started after the genocide in Uganda, in Rwanda, sorry, no? When Catholic killed Catholic, sister killed sister, and priest killed priest. So we ask, how effective is our mission? Our mission creates a culture, First Peter, so that people can identify among themselves are brother and sister, and your question, how they can create a conscience, no? I think that this is my question, so I only stop. And many situations also in our continent, in Africa, ask for that, no? Which kind of formation we have for our community so that the community can stand in front of any political power and raise their voice. How can we do that?
So on your behalf, I would like to finish by thanking most sincerely Leila de Lima for her witness, her courage, her passion, and also for her commitment to go on this journey in terms of securing human rights for each and for all. And we thank you, and we will pray for you and for your people. And I thank everybody here for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless.